I heard this guy say that black culture is the problem.
So here's what I'm getting. There is something about black subculture in America today that holds African Americans themselves back?
Yes.
I disagree. And I have come to the conclusion from studying history that white supremacy is the problem. I lived in North Carolina from 2 years old to 14, 12 years, starting from the 90s. So I'm going to give an example starting from North Carolina.
Cynthia Brown, whose descendants were in Wilmington back in 1898, is a historian at her church where there's a preserved copy of the Declaration from the next day's newspaper.
We will no longer be ruled and will never again be ruled by men of African origin.
They would strip black men of voting rights. They would give white men a large part of the employment heretofore given to black men.
We'll get back to the 1898 story.
The most surprising finding was really related to blacks with no criminal background relative to whites with a felony conviction. We find that a white applicant with a felony conviction fared just as well, if not better, relative to a black applicant with a clean record. This suggests that being black in America today is essentially like having a felony conviction in terms of one's chances of finding employment.
The reason the KKK and other racist killers don't get looked at as terrorists.
We can take our country back from the Communist Party. We can take it back from the niggers. It's time for us to band together. If we have to get in the streets and fight blood up to our knees, by God, it's time to get ready to fight. Give them what they want. Fight for this country.
The state protects the Klan, and this makes it clear. They came through and they opened fire. They opened fire on us. And we fire back to protect ourselves.
The Klan, or whoever it was, jumped out and just started shooting in the direction of the thickest concentration of people. They seemed to be aiming at particular people. There were several police in the area who did nothing until after these murderers left. Police came in immediately and started arresting people who were trying to help those who had fallen. Nelson Johnson, was taken into custody, kicked in the head by the police. He was bleeding from the arm as he was trying to help people.
Because the world is built off corruption through the institution of white supremacy.
Heading up this organization is the #1 G-man, the famed John Edgar Hoover.
He targeted Dr. King, he targeted Malcolm X, and over 80% of the targets of COINTELPRO were members of the Black Panther Party.
Vice President Agnew has called the Panthers a completely irresponsible, anarchistic group of criminals.
Hoover decided that for some reason the Panthers were the most dangerous organization in the United States, even more dangerous than the Communist Party or the Mafia. And so he ordered them essentially destroyed.
So Lyndon Johnson, although good liberal that he was, at least in regard, Lyndon Johnson had a complicated career and changed positions on issues many times. But good liberal though he was at that moment, he was in fact engaging in a breathtaking arrogance.
Yes.
On two counts. One, that white people were the ones who were responsible for where black people stood in the race, that it was up to whites entirely. That blacks, as he described, I'm
devastating.
black people are passive; they're acted upon.
That's right. That's right.
And then the second act of arrogance is the supposition that somehow the federal government could fix it.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, Today, many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps.
Yes, it is staggering. But if you wanted to be charitable, you could say, well, he said this in 1965.
Since he specifically said the year of 65, let's see what the black community was saying themselves.
Riots broke out in many cities. 36 died in Watts in 65.
Just one incident too many in August 1965. A carload of guys not bothering anybody pulled over by the highway patrol. The LAPD come on the scene, slap a woman. They try and push people around. Some people begin to fight back. And it spreads like lightning through the community. It was an absolutely transforming event.
Looting, murder, and arson have nothing to do with civil rights.
Probably the most single important thing that happened in Los Angeles in August 1965 was the youth on the streets coming together and uniting with each other to drive the LAPD out of the community.
In 65, most of your gangs segued into a political party. Like I mentioned, the Slausons went into the Black Panther Party. But then the other gangs, they kind of identified more with a culture nationalist group called the US organization.
We have gotten our manhood back by the acts of violence. When the brother throws a brick or snipes from a building that he...
These guys had, different philosophies. They didn't really, get along with each other's philosophy. They didn't believe in with each other's what they were doing. Panthers are more about confrontation, confronting the man. The US organization, from my understanding, was a little more abstract about, their rage. Sometimes our own personal perspective kind of overshadows what really went on. I wanted to clear up what was really going on, before my time, I don't believe that Karenga was working for the FBI. He might have been manipulated by the FBI.
But if you say, all right, why are people now repeating it in 2013 when we've had nearly half a century of experience to the contrary?
And all of this in context. This is when Martin Luther King got assassinated, 1968.
I have some very sad news for all of you, and I think sad news for all of our fellow citizens. Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
We didn't really know. Nobody believed that the FBI wanted to be bothered with some little Negroes in LA trying to organize themselves and so on and so forth.
The gangs were born out of the demise of those parties. So out of the ashes of the Black Panther Party came, gangs, Crips, Bloods.
And, it would just look like a drug deal, not a political assassination.
By this time, it was a national organization. We had branches in New York, Chicago, Oakland, which was the headquarters.
Everybody knows about the Black Panthers, and they know about Huey and Eldridge Cleveland and those guys in Oakland. The world needs to know about Bunchy Carter.
It's a whole nother conversation about who Bunchy was.
He proclaimed himself Bunchy Carter, the renegade of Slauson.
There's no really books about him. You don't see him on T-shirts.
And here he was, some so-called nigga out to Slauson.
He's like the unsung true hero of Los Angeles, California, the whole community. I was comfortable in making Karenga the villain. And then I had to talk to Geronimo. He was like, nah.
For all of these years, the US organization has been getting a bum rap behind that killing. I'm sure Bunchy, above all, would be turning over in his grave if we were not to straighten this out.
Some kind of memorandum was uncovered from the FBI, which declared, though we did not pull the trigger on that day, January 1969, we did cause the unrest that preceded it.
And if you look within the black community, those blacks who had escaped what I call the black redneck culture, they've moved on. But it's the culture the different parts of the black community had. They were different.
And this is the 1898 story.
This is the story of an American election, but also of something we don't usually find in American history: the violent overthrow of a democratically elected government. The Democratic and Republican parties of 1898 in many ways occupied opposite parts of the political spectrum than they do today.
Most African Americans were voting for the Republican Party, and the Democratic Party was white voters almost exclusively. White supremacy was the central focus of the platform for the Democratic Party.
At a rally just before the election, Alfred Moore Waddell provoked the crowds. He said, "Negro office holding ought at once and forever be brought to an end, even if we have to choke the current of the Cape Fear River with carcasses." The votes were counted, and the Democrats won.
Democratic candidates won every seat they had a candidate up for election in.
But some local fusionist politicians remained in power because their seats hadn't been up for re-election, like the white Republican mayor and the Board of Aldermen. And of course, the election did nothing to undo the economic power black folks held in the city. The Democrats had won the election, but their goal of total white supremacist control remained out of reach.
And so they engineered what was essentially a coup d'etat.
The day after the election, at a gathering for white men in Wilmington, the Democrats unveiled a document called the White Declaration of Independence. It contained an ultimatum. Cynthia Brown, whose descendants were in Wilmington back in 1898, is a historian at her church, where there's a preserved copy of the declaration from the next day's newspaper.
We will no longer be ruled and will never again be ruled by men of African origin.
They would strip black men of voting rights. They would give white men a large part of the employment heretofore given to black men. And as for Alex Manly, we demand that he leave this city forever within 24 hours. The next morning, hundreds of white men marched to the offices of the Daily Record. Manly was gone. He had fled to save his own life. They set the Daily Record building on fire. This is where it once stood.
Once the white leadership destroyed Alex Manly's printing press, they destroyed one way in which the African American community in Wilmington could organize itself and keep itself informed.
At City Hall, the mayor and Board of Aldermen were forced out.
There's 200 armed men in City Hall at the time. They didn't do it of their own free will. And as they resigned, a new member selected by the Democratic Party was voted into office.
Waddell, who once threatened to fill the Cape Fear River with black bodies, was the new mayor of Wilmington. Meanwhile, the mob had grown to about 2,000 men, and the violence spilled into the streets. In these photos, X's mark where the first black residents were killed.
The stories are that they were dumped into the river, and there are varying stories about how many people were killed.
I see 40 to 60 clearly as fatalities as a result of the violence, but I think it was higher.
Many black residents hid for days in the swamps and the wooded cemeteries in the city, including Cynthia's great-grandmother. And thousands of other residents fled Wilmington, never to return. Shortly afterward, Democrats printed booklets celebrating a glorious victory, and in the newspapers depicted black residents as the instigators.
This image is a gross misrepresentation of what actually happened during 1898. You know, what you see is African American men with guns, not white men with machine guns.
The city never regained its black majority population. Jim Crow laws like literacy tests and poll taxes that prevented black people from voting were immediately enacted, and Wilmington's spirit of black opportunity was crushed. Black political representation in the state was over. It would be 90 years until North Carolina elected its next black Congress member.
Aside from throwing up your hands in despair, what is to be done?
The first thing to be done is to understand that this was a result of policies begun in the 1960s. This is not a legacy of what happened 100 years before the 1960s.
The breakdown of the black family is not a legacy of slavery.
No.
The Department of Housing and Urban Development and the federal government writ large in the first 7 decades of the 20th century invested billions of dollars in racial segregation and concentrated poverty. Each time this country created a peculiar institution that subordinated black people, slavery, Jim Crow, it created and dismantled it. They replaced it with another one. And the iconic black ghetto, I don't use that as a pejorative, I use it as a descriptor, was a follow-on institution to slavery and Jim Crow. That's the legacy that every new administration inherits, and the Biden administration has as well.
Today, I'm directing the Department of Housing and Urban Affairs and Urban Development to redress historical racism in federal housing policies.
So the hood ain't the hood because black people made it the hood. Rather, it was intentionally created by the government to oppress black people through a federal policy that would adversely impact them for generations to come.
Precisely. Mass incarceration of black males because America didn't need us no more. Mass incarceration of black males and making a black man economically irrelevant to the black woman. In other words, we're going to make sure his woman does not fight by his side for economic justice. And that's one of the reasons they rolled the welfare programs in the black community.
And partly because of the general rule that welfare is cut off if there is a man in the house, fathers are often driven away so that mother and children can eat.
85% of the head of household is a woman, because most of the men who should be in the household, they cannot make a decent living. And of course it is better to know that a child will be fed 12 months out of the year than 3 months, which during the summer when construction work you can make a decent living.
The welfare programs was not to help black women and their children. The welfare programs was to distract black women.
Raise your hand if you're married. None of you are married. Raise your hand if you would like to be married to your baby's father. 1. The rest of you who don't plan to get married, why don't you plan to get married? I'd like to know that.
You already have your child to think about, and then a whole family to care for. You know, it's a lot of responsibility. And then you don't want the commitments.
I wouldn't want no man holding me down, because I think I can make it as a single parent.
But don't you think you might need help in raising that baby from a man?
Not really. I didn't have a father. My father wasn't in the home, so, you know, it really, male figures are not substantially important in the family.
I ain't thinking about holding up for no sex, my man. You know, if a girl, you know, she get having a baby, carrying a baby, hey, that's on her. You know, I'm not gonna stop my pleasures because of another woman.
What about birth control? What about condoms?
Girls don't like them things. They don't like them things. They'll tell you to take them things off. They figure that you saying that they filthy or they dirty or something.
73. This is the Vietnam War also. This is heroin everywhere. Everywhere. It's heroin everywhere. Planted there by the FBI, by the way. We didn't know it then, but now we know the counterintelligence program and all of that, and Jan Gover and all of that. Now we know who put the drugs in the community, but then nobody knew. It was just everywhere. And hip-hop was an escape.
Hip-hop, rap, and R&B would not be where it is today without gang culture. But before we get into that, we need to go back. Modern day gang culture and the blueprint for gangs started in LA.
Los Angeles.
So where did the first black gangs appear? Some of which then continued and lived on for 20 more years, like the infamous Spook Hunters.
We used to get attacked by white boys, namely a group called Spook Hunters.
Yeah, they had a gang called the Spook Hunters. Yeah. We shut them down. They had a black man hanging on the back of their jacket with a rope.
Spook Hunters was an umbrella term. That was a term like, you know, black people are spooks or whatever, and we're white boys, and we're going to catch them.
Once I learned about these white gangs,
the whites were predominant in the area, so we banded together at Slauson Park.
I learned about the response to these white gangs. A gang called the Slawsons, a gang called the Farmers, the Businessmen, a gang called the Gladiators. These were all black gangs. And I learned about these famous gang members back then.
I started to hear about Bird and about Chinaman. And then these are Slawsons, and it dawned on me, and me and my buddies on the block, we're in the Slawson area, so it's starting at the end of grammar school. We said, well, we're going to be Slawsons.
The Slawson name is famous from Bunchy Carter, who was the one who founded the L.A. chapter of the Black Panther Party.
If it wasn't for Slawson, you could put this on national TV and go ask somebody.
The Bronx streets was dominated by Caucasians. That's an important footnote for hip-hop history. That's an important thing to understand as far as American history, New York City history, Bronx history. Bronx was dominated by Caucasians at that time.
And then they heard of the Black Spades, and they had their name and their center pads.
And all of this atmosphere led into the African-American youth organizations, what they call youth gangs, of the late 1960s, early 70s. Some of these African-American street organizations, like the Black Spades, formed to fight oppression. You have to understand all of this in context. This is when Martin Luther King got assassinated, 1968.
I have some very sad news for all of you, and I think sad news for all of our fellow citizens. Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
Started the Spades when we was what? 14, 13, something like that, around that age.
Around that area. My understanding, there was youth gangs forming in California around the same time, late 1960s.
Raymond Washington was just 16 years old when he created what has now become one of the largest street gangs in the world.
It was 1968, 123.
Right.
123, junior high school, James M. Curran.
So this is where it all started, right? The Spades? Yeah. This is where it all started, 123?
1968, 69, these are the years that Muhammad Ali was banned from boxing. Like, they took his license because he wouldn't fight in the Vietnam War.
69 books, so it's kind of, here, right here is Raymond Washington. Just months later, he would get kicked out this school and go to Edison and start the Crips.
It started because we had other gangs around the neighborhood that we couldn't go past certain areas.
Right.
They was always threatening us.
And that's the way the Bronx was, man. There was so many gangs here. There were gangs all over the place.
Our projects, Bronxdale, was basically on the borderline of a lot of Caucasian racist groups.
Well, there's an Italian neighborhood really less than a mile from our projects to the north. They would drive into our community with baseball bats and chains and switchblades, and they would beat us up or they would rob us. Like, imagine like 20 white guys walking around looking like Fonzie. So the Black Spades formed as a way to protect our community.
You could maybe, have to go to a store that was in Westchester Square, and once you get there, they're gonna chase you. They're gonna chase you with bats and beat you. So if you ran and you got to White Plains Road, you were safe. The Spades had that, like, you couldn't cross that.
I want to understand what this is really all about. This is real, the birth of hip-hop. This is real, where it all came from, how it evolved, infinite stages.
The history of hip-hop, where would it start from?
Well, you can't have the history of hip-hop with first of all talking about the gang culture, the Black Spade. One of the things I told you when we were talking on the phone, and we talked about the light bulb, the analogy of the light bulb. Thomas Edison created the light bulb.
Right.
But he couldn't have done that without Ben Franklin discovering electricity 100 years or whatever previously.
Right.
So while the genesis of hip-hop, and I know people aren't going to like it, is Kool Herc, and the people can say whatever they want, he would not have been possible without the electricity that was created by the culture that was existing in the 1970s, early part of the 70s, and that very specifically is gang culture, and more specifically starting with the Black Spades.
Man, he's my brother, Jack. Well, my heart. He's my brother, too. And I think that right now, if any of my members came to your turf, you point them out to me, I guarantee you they'll pay for it. They came up there in trucks on our turf.
For all that fighting, you understand? The sucker think he good. The sucker think he can whoop me. And I know he can't whoop me. Hey, boy, the nigga whole style is chump.
Come in, bust it, knock us down, take our clothes, take our record players, take our money, our records, and every damn thing we own, including the damn fluorescent light bulbs.
And this is the beginning of the culture we call hip-hop. This is the very first spark of hip-hop.
What year did the war start between the Crips and the Pyrus?
Actually, 72, as it came to its end, it became a situation where it couldn't be amended. So that's when love kind of like got real deteriorated, you know?
Tell me what was going on in 1973.
73? Well, basically me, in 73, I was, unfortunately, I had to be taken off the street because of work I had got accused of doing. You know what I'm saying? I ended up doing a little time. You know what I mean? I went off to YTS, but it was really rough in 73 because it was a lot. That's when the real shooting and all that kind of stuff started taking place amongst the brothers.
So you was on the street when all the shooting started?
Of course.
And then you end up in YA for a case. Somebody said there was 33 gang-related murders in Compton in 1973. And you said...
Was no first blood gang.
But when was the Blood Alliance cemented? Before 74, in 74, or after 74?
I'm going to say right now, brother, man, we was forced to be blood because, like, when I went to jail for my case, I went to jail for, I was alone. Yeah, I was a bad guy, considered to be a tough guy with a reputable name and shit. But when I'm in jail, and I'm against a powerful force like the Crips, who were all united, because there was no separation amongst Crips at that time. You know what I mean? You was a Crip, you was welcome to the family. They had one big old family. When I went to jail, I had established myself with others to support me. You feel what I'm saying? You didn't necessarily have to be for Pyru because I was like a loner Pyru. You know, if I had another homie in there, he was way on the other side of the institution. You know what I'm saying? We had to meet up, and it wasn't easy to come together because you go on that line, you got to get down with a whole bunch of Crips. You know what I'm saying? So we had to form an alliance. And a lot of us was getting beat up, beat down, rat-packed, jumped on, and other people stood and watched because they was there before me, and they had got comfortable in the situation where they could start saying cuz wasn't a bad name to everybody. Then, like I said, we had to adopt the name Blood, and use that as our primary language to identify each other. And those who know that it was not Crips had to stop saying cuz. And then we had to form that alliance in jail. It didn't happen on the streets.
The 1970s was the decade of the mass incarceration of black males. This is the laying the groundwork. This is the evolution. Right?
It ain't about the power to the people no more. It's about power to yourself.
We're out here building a new nation for black people. It's time for you to start paying some dues, nigga. I ain't giving you shit.
And I remember the same brothers wearing, trying to emulate the Panthers was like getting rid of the afro and laying it.
Lord Jesus had dudes in the veins and the coats.
But after the Superfly movie, you didn't see no images like Huey.
Yeah, that was gone.
All that was going.
A lot of black men started saying, well, I'm not going to get involved with that, and I'm not going to get involved with that.
You better take good care of me. Nothing better happen to one hair on my gorgeous head. Can you dig it?
Brothers start seeing those images on the big screen. It's about me. I'm going to get mine, and they better not fuck with me. I think that was kind of like changing up the guard right around there.
At the end of the movie, he won. When they started making movies like Superfly where guys got away, then, we can do it. And this kept guys like me going to jail.
So what effect do you think at the end of the movie by him winning that they had on the community?
A lot of people out there in Inglewood Cemetery, that's the effect that they had.
Oh, Superfly. You're gonna make your fortune. But if you lose...
You take something away from a community or people, the community will replace it with something. When you took the leadership away in the 60s, the youth replaced it with something. We seeked our own leadership. We felt basically that the leaders of the 60s failed us because we didn't quite comprehend what they stood for. The act of violence totally on the people, without a people fighting back. It didn't make any sense to youngsters. So we formed our gangs and we dealt with our own brand of leadership. Today they call it Bloods and Crips.
Half of us didn't go to school, didn't attend school. A lot of the documentaries say we were behind the Black Panthers movement and this and all that shit. No, we thought none of that shit.
The Crips and Bloods are the bastard offspring of the political parties of the 60s. The leadership falling apart in the Black Panther Party, the US organization, and most of the gangs were born out of the demise of those parties.
We were uneducated, majority of us were uneducated youngsters in poverty, man. And we wasn't thinking about that. We wanted everything the easy way. It was easy to take this shit from somebody and beating somebody's ass, you know what I'm saying? Then learn how to develop our minds, you know what I'm saying? And find new systems and ways intelligently, right? To accomplish no goals. We wasn't on that level, man. We was on gangster shit, taking shit, cause it was a whole lot easier. With, you know, we did school. We didn't attend school. Okay? So for anyone to say that and make documentaries and put the Black Panthers, the movement, Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and all that kind of shit, no, don't do that. Don't disrespect those guys that was trying to stand for something for real. You understand what I'm saying? Because we wasn't standing for nothing but ourselves. You understand what I'm saying? It was gangsters.
And if you had your man, you wouldn't need welfare.
The Man in the House rule was written to prevent welfare cheating, to make sure that aid to families with dependent children would go only to families headed by mothers. But the effect of the Man in the House rule is to create for children an atmosphere of investigation and surveillance. And thus, the welfare system in its operation turns out to be a system to make life harder for children.
The purpose of this is not to paint black people as victims, because people with a single-parent home can go to college and be productive citizens. And also people with a two-parent home that love being outside since a kid and adapted to the environment can end up doing time in prison. That's an individual thing. But this is to show that these races target us for us to fail in life. It's a proven fact throughout history.
The welfare system helps the disintegration of the American family. It offers money to families if the fathers will leave them and stay away, in that sense undoing the very stability of the family and taking away one of the two parents that children, of course, need. And what I have seen, I'm afraid to say, all over the country is that the legal system works against the best kind of home for these children. We don't encourage parents to be at home with the children. We don't encourage mothers to feel that they can find their destiny as mothers. We take away, in many of the most vulnerable homes, fathers from those homes. We herd foster children together in institutions rather than trying to find decent homes for them. We don't tap the resources we have in communities and with respect to older people so that they can help out vulnerable homes. We don't sanction and encourage and support in every way, morally, psychologically, and financially, the dignity and integrity of the home. And in the worst of it is that the homes that are most vulnerable are the homes that are least supported by the policies of local, state, and federal governments. And no wonder then, out of these more vulnerable neighborhoods, we get an endless cycle of troubled, delinquent, wayward youth who grow up even more and become the lawbreakers of our society. Now, I don't know how you break this cycle except by starting out with young children.